welcome to LA to everyone that's here. I have to say that I loved being in the lobby out there, talking to people I hadn't seen in a while, meeting new friends. But the undercurrent was a passion for historic buildings and historic houses. And so it's great to be here with kindred spirits. So welcome very much to LA. And you heard a little bit about how you're going to the different houses that you're going to be seeing this afternoon and tomorrow. And I just want to encourage you, you'll be driving a fair amount between these, is to keep your eyes looking out the window because you're going to be driving through some phenomenal neighborhoods. So while the houses you're going to see are truly exceptional, there's also going to be a lot that you will see, and you will have a better understanding of Los Angeles because of that. So as Alan mentioned, we were founded to save the Central Library. That took us a long time to do, but we finally did it, and it was a win-win solution. And that's something that the Conservancy really looks to do, is to save the building, but also make sure that the property owner or the developer is able to get what they want out of it. And we are the largest local preservation group in the country. We have 6,500 members, which people are surprised about. You kind of think, LA, really? But that's true. And we do advocacy, but we also do a lot of education. And so a large part of our education has to do with getting people out into the streets and into the neighborhoods and actually touching historic buildings. Because there's a lot of historic buildings that you can't see from our freeways. And so it's very important to get people out. So my talk today, though, is going to really focus on iconic houses and how to save these houses in Los Angeles. When Natasha and I first met, that was what she had asked that we do. So there are basically three ways to save a historic building, particularly a house. You can own it. So here's the Eames house, which you're going to learn a lot more about. And this is really exemplary stewardship. The family wanted to do the right thing by the house, and they are doing the right thing by the house. You can also do a house museum. I am not going to talk about house museums because you all are the experts. But house museums are a very important way in which houses are in fact preserved. But not every house can be a house museum. And so what do we do with the houses that are not house museums? And in that case, we need to find a good steward. This is the Green and Green house, the Blacker house in Pasadena. And there had been a bad owner of this house. He had stripped the light fixtures out of the house and sold them at auction. And the ultimate buyer that came in was a good steward. And this couple actually restored. They bought light fixtures back and restored them. They replicated light fixtures. And they have taken just remarkable care of the Blacker house and really returned it to its glory. So sometimes the best answer is a good property owner. The second tool that we use a lot at the Conservancy is designation. The house on the left is individually designated at the local level as a historic cultural monument in the city of LA. It's listed on the National and California Register as part of the Carroll Avenue Historic District, and it's a contributor to the Angelino Heights Preservation Overlay Zone, which is our version of a historic district. And I point that out because a lot of people think like, oh, the National Register is the really important one. You want to be at the top of the food chain in terms of designation. And really, sometimes you want to be designated at the local level because there's more review power associated with that. There really is no National Register police that come out and look at buildings. So if you want something really protected, you need to think about how is the best way to do that. And historic districts can go from Victorian, like Angelino Heights, to the Balboa Highlands Eichler Tract, which is in Granada Hills. And as you can see from this photo, the district protection really helps preserve the context for these houses. And that's a very important thing, too, when you're talking about historic preservation. Now, not every city in the United States, but particularly in Los Angeles, have a preservation ordinance. And so in the county of Los Angeles, we have 88 cities in the county, and less than half of them have any kind of preservation ordinance. So one of the things we're trying to do at the Conservancy is to get more ordinances in more cities, because that provides that sort of first step to provide protection to these houses. We started our report card in 2003 to track sort of what was the state of ordinances at that point, and we've been working on that every year. So this is now a priority at the Conservancy to get more ordinances so that there is that first step, because that is sometimes the most powerful way to do that. And the last way to really save excuse me, I'm just getting over a cough. The last way to save houses is to do a conservation easement or a facade easement. And this is the most powerful. And it's powerful for many ways. This is the Green and Green house, the only Green and Green in the city of Los Angeles. It's the Lucy Wheeler house. And the longtime owner was a preservation architect, and when he died, his family placed an easement on the property before selling it. And easements can protect both the exterior and the interior in this house. And they also can provide for properties, to be preserved in their entirety. And in this case, this is an estate in San Marino, but it also protects all of the landscaping on its 4 acres of property. This is a Myron Hunt property. Now, what's interesting here is the owner is actually giving his house to an institution upon his death, so he's made his estate plans. But he also has donated a conservation easement to make sure that the institution that's receiving the house abides by the preservation practices, so that you might want to think about sort of all the different ways to make sure that these buildings are protected. This is a Lloyd Wright. Vim talked about Lloyd Wright. We have an easement on this property. This also was a family that wanted to have the house preserved in perpetuity. And this was a house that was really in a threatened area because it's in a demand, very expensive area, and this is a low-scale building. Here is the interior of that. And as part of the conservation easement, we would make sure that the property is well maintained. So it's not only reviewing all of the alterations to the property, but it's making sure that it is maintained. Here we have another Lloyd Wright house. For some reason, Lloyd Wright is the dominant architect in our easement collection, which is great. And we have 31 easements right now. There are financial incentives to donating easements, and that is very important. The property must be listed on the National Register to be able to get the financial incentives. And we have more residential properties in our easement collection, and I think that's because that's one of the few incentives you can use for residential property. Now, I've talked about owning property, designating property, putting an easement on property, but how does all this really work? How do the pieces come together? So we're going to talk for a few minutes about the Ennis House. And this is a spectacular masterpiece of textile block construction by Frank Lloyd Wright that was built in 1924. And it was locally designated, listed on the National Register and the California Register, and the last private owner of the house founded a nonprofit to own and operate the house as a house museum. But there were a lot of complexities to this, and ultimately the nonprofit board was not able to handle its greatest challenge, which was the 1994 earthquake. This actually is after the rains came in 2005. But there was funding of over $4 million that was brought in to help repair and retrofit the house. And the foundation board just wasn't able to really do the project management that was needed on this house. And so when the rains came in 2005, the blocks literally began to just disintegrate. And so in 2005, the National Trust for Historic Preservation actually listed the Ennis House on its America's 11 Most Endangered Historic Places, which got a lot of press. So ultimately, 3 organizations came together: the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Frank Lloyd Wright Conservancy, and the Los Angeles Conservancy, and we took over the board of the Ennis House. Nothing we wanted to do, but it just needed to be done, and we were able to start work on the project. Work began in 2006 and was completed a year later. Unfortunately, the cost of the repairs had escalated significantly from 1994 when the FEMA grant was received. And so the foundation board had to take out a loan, basically, to cover that difference. But before the loan was taken out, a conservation easement was put on the property. So the project is done. There were some awards, but even though that project was done, the house still needed substantially more work. And so it was sort of a defining moment is what's going to be the future of this. And for a variety of reasons, a house museum was not going to work, and it had mainly to do with the fact it was a hillside location and the access in and out was very difficult. So the Ennis House Foundation brought in consultants to do a viability study to look at what the different options were, and ultimately the report came back that given the use restrictions in this neighborhood and the fact that there couldn't be a lot of people in and out, and there is not a lot of philanthropic support for things like house museums in Los Angeles, the decision was ultimately made to sell the property to somebody that did have the resources to be able to do this. So that was done in 2011, and now this is a shot of the interior. The Conservancy continues to be involved with the house through our easement program, and it is great to see somebody with the resources to actually tackle the thorny issues of conservation of the textile blocks. And it's a Frank Lloyd Wright house, so making sure that it doesn't leak. So here we have sort of the trifecta. It was designated, it had an easement, and ultimately we found a good steward. Second example I'm going to talk about is the Cronish House. This is a 1954 Richard Neutra design at nearly 7,000 feet. It's believed to be 7,000 square feet. It's believed to be Neutra's largest residential commission in North America, and it was the last intact Neutra design in Beverly Hills. In early 2011, the Cronish House was listed for sale as a teardown. Now, it wasn't in the best of shape, but it still was remarkably intact. The city of Beverly Hills at that time had no preservation ordinance and therefore had no real legal way to try and delay the demolition. The Conservancy and other groups got almost 600 letters and emails sent to the city council, so they knew this was a big issue, and there was a hearing. But still, the city had no authority. And so ultimately, at this hearing, the mayor asked, can we have 60 days to try and find a new buyer? And the property owner didn't care, they just wanted their money. So they said, okay, we'll give you 60 days. So we started to work. And so the house was listed at $10 million, which is a lot of money, even in Beverly Hills, and for a house in not very good shape. So we literally called everybody we knew who was rich, or knew people that were rich. And because we were just determined to find a new buyer. And a new buyer was found. And this buyer has decided to restore the house to its original glory and has done an absolutely amazing job at that. And with the happy ending of the Cronish House, the city of Beverly Hills adopted a preservation ordinance in 2012 to review demolition of significant historic resources. So they didn't want to be in that position again. And they also, as part of that ordinance, have the ability to designate buildings locally. And in 2015, the Cronish House was designated a local historic landmark. So we have good stewardship and designation, and we're hopeful we'll get an easement on this property at some point. So the final house that I want to just kind of mention, because it's not solved yet, is the Singleton House. And this is a Wallace Neff estate. It was his very last estate that he designed. It's late, it's 1970, which people kind of question, like, is that really historic? But it is. And it's an excellent example of French Revival style. And here is the landscape by Thomas Church and Philip Shipley. This is a 7-acre property in Holmby Hills, and it's threatened with demolition and subdivision into multiple housing sites. So this is a case where we have a bad owner who wants to do something that would destroy the house. And so we have been mobilizing to get the building designated. It's not for sale, so at this point we can't find a new owner, and we're certainly not going to get an easement at this point. So we're working on designation. And so that we did a nomination. The Cultural Heritage Commission has sent that forward unanimously to the City Council, and we expect that it will be designated in the next month, which would be very exciting. But this is a long road. Sort of the designation gives us the ability to be at the table with the property owner. And sometimes it's the actual process of designation, like, that they'll sit down and actually meet with us. Before, they wouldn't return any calls or emails, but now all of a sudden they've invited us to the property to see it, which is all good. So when Natasha and I were talking about sort of what she wanted me to cover, she said, what's the big issue? And Vim already stole a little thunder with McMansions. But I have to say, I don't go to an event or a dinner party or, the movies without somebody, coming up and saying, we've got to do something about McMansions. And this, is mansionization at its worst. And as Vim pointed out, it's sort of the McMansion, the monster house being built in an established neighborhood. And this is a problem throughout Los Angeles and Southern California, maybe in your community outside of this area. And it really has to do with scale and massing. And we're also used to everyone saying, a man's house is his castle. And one of the things that we are starting to really come back with, and this has really come from our neighborhood partners, is your right to do what you want with your property can't infringe upon my right. And so you don't have the right to take away my light or my air or my privacy. And so there has become a strong backlash throughout Los Angeles. And it's gotten so bad that there are now two very specific efforts underway. One is an initial ordinance was done in 2008, because sadly this is not a new issue for us. But the new ordinance in 2008 had too many loopholes. And so people, architects, developers quickly figured out how to maximize those loopholes. So there's a new baseline mansionization ordinance, very sexy title, isn't it? And that is just about through the approval process, and we're hoping to have that done this summer. And it will deal with things like where you place driveways. You sort of look at these two photos, the house on the right, has their driveway that goes back to a detached garage. So you have this sense of the house being the dominant feature. On the left, you have the garage is the dominant feature of the house. And something as simple as where the driveway is affects how much even parking there is on the street, because a double car garage will take out 2 parking spaces where a detached garage only takes out 1. So we're having, as preservationists, to look at things very differently than what we do in terms of just saving these houses. And the other thing that is taking place is that our zoning code is being adapted. Our zoning code is historic, and we will be looking at significant changes to single-family zoning to try and deal with this in more effective ways. Right now, the only real tool that we have are called historic preservation overlay zones, which I mentioned earlier because Carroll Avenue and Balboa Highlands are both HPOZs. And it's a great tool. Everything is reviewed. There are preservation plans for each district. The problem with that is that they're very labor intensive, and the city doesn't have the staff to do that. So there's currently, I think, 30 HPOZs, and there's another 20 in the pipeline. So that tells you how much people really want to protect and preserve their neighborhoods. And that is one of the great kind of hidden truths about Los Angeles, is that we really are a city of neighborhoods. And when you ask somebody where they live, they will tell you their neighborhood usually with great pride, and talk about what it is that makes them want to live in that place. And so what we're really seeing is that people do care about their history. They want to protect their neighborhoods, even if they would not necessarily be considered historic according to all the criteria. So I've just quickly gone through, the 3 major ways to save buildings: ownership, designation, and easements, but more is needed. And that's why looking at these zoning code changes is really important. Looking at doing, more outreach in terms of bringing people into the choir is very significant, and, we're making good progress on that. But it really gets down to how do we convince people? And through the work at the Conservancy, I have to say there's a lot of luck involved, but there also is the power of persuasion and really bringing, everybody to the table and trying to find the solution. And that's really what the focus of the Conservancy is. And when we do win, it's important to celebrate. And it's that's not always obvious, but it is really important. Because, first of all, we don't save every building. And second, to really talk about the saves and the wins and what does that mean? What does that mean for our city to have these buildings still for you all to come visit? And so we have started doing our gala at a great historic estate. So we've been doing this about 6-7 years. And it's really interesting to overhear people's comments. I love to overhear conversations. And, a person was like, God, you can have modern art in a historic building. Historic house. I never thought of that. Or that couch is really comfortable. I wouldn't think you could have a, comfortable couch. It's not all the Gamble House. So it's really important to actually get people into these houses and to really savor the moment. So my words are, to you all doing, God's work in these historic house museums is continue to bring people into the choir. You are such an important point of access to bring people in. And thank you so much for all of your hard work. We really appreciate it.
We can take a couple of questions for Linda. Question right there.
Hi.
Please say who you are.
I'm Allison Cross. I am the executive director of Russell Wright's home in Garrison, New York. And I have a question about getting designation while a building or a home is owned by someone, that you're able to do that without, that's one. And then does the Conservancy have legal services so that when someone disregards the designation, is there legal action?
Sure. So the first question is, how do we designate without the property owner consent? Right. Most ordinances, not all, but of the less than half that we have in the county of LA, most of those have the ability to designate without owner consent. And that's something when we're working with cities to try and get ordinances, we're very focused on that clause. Because if you only are going to designate the ones that the people want, that's good. I mean, because there are future owners, but it's not as effective as trying to save something from, the depths of destruction. So that is something to look for. You can actually put things on the National Register without owner consent, but they're not actually listed, they're just determined eligible, which depending upon where you are in the country, in California, we have very strong environmental review. And historic preservation is included in environmental review. So just like, an owl, the preservation is kind of equal with that. So it just sort of depends. But I would look for that in the ordinance to make sure that you can do that. And the second question is, do we have legal services? We do not have a lawyer on our board, we do have lawyers on our board, on our staff. And we have been very fortunate to almost always, when we have filed a lawsuit, have had people have lawyers do it pro bono. And that is something that in some communities is very available. If you know lawyers and you're kind of able to work through the crowd to find people that will do this. We have an active lawsuit right now, and we did have to pay an attorney to do that. But we've now established kind of a reserve fund for that purpose, if we need to do that.
Another question? Up there.
Hi, Linda. Raymond Neutra.
Hey.
Imagine a situation around the various subway stops of the new line going out west, and the legitimate idea of having transit-related high-density housing in an area where the owners feel that this is infringing on their light and their historic fabric. How do you balance those two legitimate concerns?
I have to say that the kind of balancing greater density that goes with transit and neighborhoods is an issue, very much so. Partly because where these lines, the transportation lines go through, tend to be in established neighborhoods. So we have been working on that. I think that some of the bigger issues are really for us is when you have a historic building in one of these transit centers, how do you begin to negotiate? How do you keep a smaller scale, and not even necessarily short building, but it can be like a 10-story building. But how do you negotiate to save that and still get the desired density around these transit stops? So we have been involved in that very much. We spend a lot of time commenting on projects and going to meetings and testifying to try and get them to be more sensitive and better. LA is very much on growth mode, and we are investing probably more than any other city on mass transit right now, which is great. It's going to be great for the future, but we have to make sure that the places that we care about are part of that future also. So as we're going through this zoning code revision, which has the catchy little name of Recode LA, that's one of the things we're looking at, are some more creative ways to bring density into an area but still protect those places. And I think the tool that we're looking most seriously at, which other cities have made better use of than we have, are transfer of development rights. So you begin so that the property owner that has a historic building doesn't lose the benefit of increased development in the area. But it's very tricky. It's very tricky, and you have to be you have to pay attention.